All right, let's dive into one of the most powerful phrases in American history. It's a slogan that didn't just start an argument. Nope. It lit the fuse for a full-blown revolution. Taxation without representation.
But that begs the question, right? How can a decision made thousands of miles away in the grand halls of Parliament possibly spark a revolution? Well, that's exactly the story we're going to unpack today. The incredible chain reaction that turned a tax dispute into a fight for a new nation.
So here's our roadmap. We'll start with the price of a massive military victory. Then we'll see how Britain tightened its grip on the colonies, which kicked off this huge debate about what representation even means. From there, we'll watch as resistance starts to take root, hits a critical breaking point, and finally mobilizes an entire people.
Now, you might be surprised to hear that our story doesn't really start with a tax. It starts with a victory. The French and Indian War was a huge win for the British Empire. But oh man, that victory came with an absolutely staggering bill.
Seriously, winning that war was incredibly expensive. So Britain's leaders looked across the Atlantic at the American colonies, who'd really benefited from all that military protection, and basically said, all right, it's time for you to help pay up. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some new tax. This was a fundamental, earth-shattering shift in how things were done.
And to get why this was such a shock, you need to know this term, salutary neglect. For decades, Britain had looked the other way. They weren't strictly enforcing their own laws, and this allowed the colonies to build their own economies, their own governments, and a really strong sense of independence. They got used to running their own show. And then, suddenly, the show was over.
So, with that old hands-off arrangement gone, a new era of control began. Britain wasn't just asking for a little cash anymore. It was reasserting its authority in a very direct and, well, a very confrontational way. Prime Minister George Grenville had this deliberate three-pronged plan. Step 1, enforce the trade laws. That meant cracking down hard on smuggling, which, let's be honest, was a way of life for a lot of colonists. Step 2, keep a standing army in America, a constant daily reminder of British power right in your hometown. And step 3, the big one, create new direct taxes. And boom, it happened fast. Just a rapid-fire cascade of acts hitting colonists right where it hurts, their wallets. You had the Sugar Act, then the Currency Act, and then the one that really set things on fire, the Stamp Act. This one was different. It was a direct tax on pretty much all paper goods, newspapers, legal documents, even playing cards. It was totally unavoidable, and it affected everyone. Well, the colonial protest against the Stamp Act was immediate, it was organized, and it was loud. So loud, in fact, that Parliament actually backed down and repealed it. Can you imagine the relief? It felt like a massive victory for the colonists. Or so it seemed.
Because here's the catch, and it's a huge one. On the very same day they repealed the Stamp Act, Parliament passed something called the Declaratory Act. It was this thunderous statement of power, basically saying, okay, fine, we'll get rid of that tax, but don't get it twisted. We have the absolute, unquestionable right to make laws and tax you however and whenever we want, in all cases whatsoever, period.
And right there, that reveals the real heart of the conflict. This wasn't just about money anymore, not at all. It was a fundamental disagreement over power, over rights, and about the very definition of the word representation. This is where you see the total disconnect. On one hand, the colonists believed in actual representation. Simple as that. They argued that only their own local assemblies, filled with people they actually voted for, had the right to tax them. But the British had this totally different idea called virtual representation. They claimed that a member of Parliament in London represented every single British subject, whether you were a farmer in England or a merchant in Boston. I mean, they were speaking two different political languages. It was a gap they were never going to bridge. So, when you're faced with a government that just refuses to hear your side of the argument, what do? Well, the colonists moved from just debating to actively organizing. The resistance started to get real, and it became much more unified and a whole lot louder. The Stamp Act Congress in 1765 was a huge first step. For the first time, you had 9 colonies that usually bickered with each other, coming together with one single voice. And listen to their argument, it's so key. They weren't screaming for independence yet. They were demanding their rights as British citizens, arguing that what Parliament was doing was tyranny. And thinkers like John Dickinson just captured the core fear perfectly.
His point was brilliant. It's not about the amount of the tax, he said. It's the principle. It's the thin end of the wedge, you know? If Parliament gets away with this one little tax without our consent, what's to stop them from just taking whatever they want later on? Where does it stop?
And as the years went on and tensions just kept rising, you can see the language change. The debate shifted from Dickinson's calm, reasoned arguments to the pure revolutionary fire of Patrick Henry. He lays out this stark choice: liberty or death. You can just feel it, right? The time for polite petitions was coming to an end.
And that escalation wasn't just verbal. After defiant acts like the Boston Tea Party, Britain decided it was done arguing. It was time to punish. The goal was to crush the rebellion in Massachusetts, but it ended up having the exact opposite effect. The colonists called them the intolerable acts, and for good reason. I mean, look at this list. These weren't tax laws. This was straight-up punishment designed to cripple the city of Boston. They shut down its port, its entire economy. They silenced its political voice. They stripped away legal rights. But instead of isolating Massachusetts, these acts absolutely horrified the other colonies. They all looked at what was happening and thought, whoa, if they can do that to Boston, they can do it to us. Who's next?
And that fear, that feeling of we're all in this together now, is what turns this from a political squabble into a true grassroots revolution. This wasn't just about a few famous founders in powdered wigs. This was about an entire society mobilizing for a cause. And look at how widespread this coalition was. You had merchants and artisans and the Sons of Liberty organizing protests in the cities. You had women, the Daughters of Liberty, leading these crucial boycotts. You had farmers out in the countryside making sure those boycotts stuck. Writers like Mercy Otis Warren were shaping public opinion, while laborers formed the real backbone of the street-level protests. Everybody was in.
And let's not downplay the role of women here. The boycotts organized by the Daughters of Liberty hit Great Britain right where it hurt, its economy. By refusing to buy British tea and cloth, and by spinning their own homespun fabric instead, colonial women wielded immense economic power. It was a practical sacrifice, for sure, but it was also this powerful symbol of American self-reliance.
So in the end, none of this happened in a vacuum. It was all a chain reaction. It started as a debate over taxes, got fueled by these powerful ideas of liberty, and grew into organized protest. And when that protest was met with punishment and force, it galvanized an entire society, setting the stage for war. Which leaves us with one last thing to think about. When you look at all these different people, the merchants, the farmers, the writers, the women leading boycotts, what do you think was the single most powerful thing that brought them all together? Was it the economic pain of the taxes? Was it the high-minded principle of representation? Or was it just that raw, visceral fear of a government trying to take away their freedom? It's a tough question, something to chew on.